Hello, my name is Nina. Welcome to my channel, Inside the Mind of a Human Predator. In this video, I'd like to discuss the 5 ways of knowing that you are dealing with a parent, caregiver, or an in-law displaying the covert narcissistic relational style. What is the covert narcissistic relational style? Well, in some ways, it displays similar traits to classic grandiose narcissistic relational style. This would be the underlying sense of envy, the underlying sense of superiority above all others. But at the same time, the expression is not grandiose and bombastic like the classic narcissistic relational style. You might see what you would interpret as humility or the victim status. At the same time, you would experience the same type of lack of consideration for you and others as you would with the classic narcissistic behavior. As a caveat, whenever someone addresses the subject, the question inevitably arises, are you talking about one particular individual in your life? And the answer is no. I am talking about multiple individuals whom I've observed on an empirical basis, as well as used my layperson research. And that is what's so interesting about the subject, is the fact that seemingly different individuals from different walks of life exhibit strikingly similar behaviors. It's almost as if they were made at the same factory. So let's get on with the list. As another caveat, I'd like to mention that the items of this list are not of equal value. Some are obvious, some are less so. So the first item on the list is the way you behave if you were raised by a parent or caregiver with a covert narcissistic relational style. You orient yourself externally toward others, constantly scanning your environment on hyper alert for the feelings of others. You feel responsible for others' emotional states, in fact, and should you detect something negative in your environment, you become very stressed out about detecting that level of negativity, whether or not it has anything to do with you. Now, this comes from the way you were raised by a parent who had wild mood swings, who possibly portrayed himself or herself as a victim. And as a child, you've learned, which is obviously not the case, you've learned to feel and think that you are responsible for the adult parent's emotional states. And now this is how you operate in your adult environment. Point number 2 is covert aggression, which is also colloquially referred to as passive aggression. This comes from the parent's perception that the child, and it could be an underage child or an adult child, had failed them in some way. Usually, this has little to do with the child's actual failures, and the response is disproportionate. So we're not talking about proper parenting here, where, say, a teenage child is late by several hours past his or her curfew, and proper consequences in a healthy parenting environment need to be delivered. We are talking about trivial situations where, for instance, a parent is very concerned about his or her public image in terms of the way the child performs academically. The child got an A instead of an A+ and is not at the very top of the class. The parent, as a result, feels like the child failed him or her and lashes out. Unlike grandiose narcissistic relational behavior, the covert narcissistic parent reacts through a variety of other ways, such as the silent treatment. The silent treatment can go on for hours, for days, for weeks. It could happen to an adult child, and it could happen to an underage child. Now, an adult child can clue in to what's going on. For an underage child, this is very harmful because essentially what the parent that has a very important status in the child's life is doing is erasing the child from his or her life, like the child doesn't exist. This is particularly unsettling if the child lives in the same household with the parent and communication occurs through the other parent or another sibling, and the parent continues to ignore the child as a rule. The child feels like she or he does not exist. And that really reflects and challenges the child's sense of self-worth. Other ways of covert aggression may involve breaking promises, not fulfilling certain obligations. And the maladaptive parent will, of course, make sure that the child knows that this is happening because the child had failed the parent in the parent's eyes. Now let's move on to item number 3. Item number 3 is the parent's permanent victim status. I'm not referring to certain situations in which the parent may have been factually victimized. I am referring to a particular worldview where the maladaptive parent or caregiver or in-law displaying the covertly narcissistic relational style feels like the whole world is against them. They're constantly mistreated at the grocery store, on the road, at the post office, at the playground, at work. They're always at the center of controversy of various levels, and they are always the victim. This is an ongoing thing. It's a constant thing. So, when the parent is constantly at the center of attention by being a victim, and the child happens to have a crisis of her own or his own, or something good happened to them, that detracts attention from the maladaptive parent. And the parent cannot deal with this. So the parent has to attract attention back on himself or herself. So the parent generates a variety of ways to do so, including even faking illnesses. Now, another way that the maladaptive parent or caregiver or in-law with the narcissistic relational style that is covert can display his or her victim status is through guilt tripping. I raised you, you owe me. If you don't do this one thing right now, because this is when it's convenient for me, even though I'm completely breaking your boundaries right now, you will regret this. And then the list of regrets is being given. This also comes from a dysfunctional perception of self-sacrifice. I, as a parent, did not get to do this thing or eat this thing or participate in this event because you, as a child, exist. Therefore, it's your fault that I've missed out on this, that, and the other. Now, most parents make adjustments to their lives when children arrive. A lot of times it's financial adjustments through budgets, scheduling adjustments, and so forth. This is completely normal. So when a child constantly hears that it's his or her fault that he or she essentially exists, and thereby negatively affects the parent's ability to do a variety of things, then obviously that leads to developing a particular sense of guilt and shame over one's own existence. And again, as an adult child can clue in as to what's going on and why this is happening, and that this is a form of manipulation when this is happening to an underage child or even an underage young child, it's quite harmful, and it sets a particular pattern of behaviors and perceptions in that child that affect them in their adult relationships. Now, the next point is triangulation. Triangulation, point number 4, is a dysfunctional comparison of the target, the child, to another party. In a family dynamic, most frequently, triangulation occurs with another sibling. The dynamic between the good child, the golden child, and the bad child, the black sheep, has been discussed at length in a variety of platforms. It's important to note that these situations are not static. So the golden child could be demoted to the black sheep status, and vice versa, whenever the maladaptive parent, caregiver, or even in-law feels that the child target in question, or an adult child target in question, had failed him or her in ways previously discussed. Obviously, this ends up pitting one sibling against another until at a certain point they end up comparing notes. This becomes more insidious when triangulation occurs with other parties. This could be a random celebrity on television who is so much better looking and more accomplished than you'll ever be, you failure. Or it could be a friend who has nothing to do with the situation and doesn't even know what's happening. This could lead to ruining friendships, because when you're constantly compared to a particular friend who has done so much more according to the maladaptive parent in one particular area or many particular areas, you end up harboring resentment if you don't understand what's going on at that particular friend. It could even be a historic figure who had suffered so much more than you ever will, because this historic figure was born under different circumstances that are completely beyond your control, and this historic figure has achieved so much more than you ever will at a particular age. You failure. So the other party of triangulation could really be anyone. It does not have to be a sibling. It's about the process of bringing down the target, making the target question himself or herself, and really essentially destabilizing the target, his or her perceptions of life and of himself and herself. Now, sometimes this triangulation is also culturally embedded, and it's across the board and it's recognizable. So for instance, I'm Russian, and in my culture currently there is a particular meme, and it's quite viral, and it's known as the son of my mom's friend's son. And in this meme, which is so relatable, which is why it's viral, the son of your mom's friend almost performs superhuman feats in every category. He can lift so much more than you, bro. He has an amazing family, highly accomplished wife, beautiful, genius children. He makes so much money, so much more money than you ever will. He leads a jet-setting lifestyle. He's an amazing singer and artist. So basically, the way this meme operates is to show this comparison between this friend that the maladaptive mother has and her own son, in order to dysfunctionally motivate him to do this or that thing. Now, it's also important to note that when this occurs at a cultural level, it doesn't mean that every parent or caregiver that engages in this level of triangulation is a clinical level narcissist, for instance. It means that the parent has a particular dysfunctional way of motivating their child. But it's important to note that there is a personal level and there is also the greater cultural level into which this is embedded. Now let's move on to point number 5. And point number 5 is a little bit different from the rest of my list. It is gift giving. Now, gift giving is important because it pertains to the particular attitude that the maladaptive parent, caregiver, or in-law has toward money. If that parent believes that money is intrinsically linked to suffering, that it could only come through suffering and very hard work and a lot of effort, and in no other way, then when gifts are being given to you, that attitude is going to be embedded into the strings attached, and inevitably they will be attached to a particular gift. That brings me to another point, and that is the covert contract that exists only in that maladaptive parent or caregiver's mind. That once the gift is given, that the child owes him or her something. This is never openly communicated, and it only exists in the mind of a maladaptive parent. The gift does not need to be a physical object. It could be a trip, it could be an event, it could be a favor, it could really be anything. So, when it's this parent that is operating under the impression that money comes in very hard ways, you will be guilt-tripped in terms of not appreciating the gift enough, in terms of not doing enough for the parent in return, even though you had no idea there were these strings attached. Now let's look at the other maladaptive parent, caregiver, or in-law, the one who thinks that money comes easily because they were born into wealth, they inherited money, they've had well-paying jobs, for whatever their circumstances are, their attitude toward money is that money comes easily to them and they have a lot of it. They have a little bit of a different expression about gift giving, and of course, once again, they come with strings attached. A lot of times this will be done in public, in front of other people, at a restaurant, and so forth. And there are two reasons for doing this. One, when the gift is unveiled, there's this awe at the generosity, the sheer generosity of the gift giver. Because quite often the gifts would be very considerate of the interests of the target getting the gift, and they would be very expensive to the point where the target would feel guilty receiving this gift. But the other part of this, of course, of this public display is the fact that the audience that is observing this, not just the target, is meant to feel envy. Oh my gosh, look at the sheer financial capability of the gift giver. I could never afford something like this. So this is the dual purpose of doing this to an audience, and let's not forget that those who are covertly narcissistic are also motivated by feelings of envy, so they think that everyone else around them is too. So that's my list. The items, as I've said, are not of equal value, and I thought the last item was kind of interesting to bring in because it displays certain factors from the other 4 items that I've mentioned, but it's a little bit less obvious. So I hope you find this helpful. Please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.